We'll turn off the recording when we get to the Q&A session. Um, okay, let's see. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm Virginia Palacios. I'm the Executive Director of Commission Shift Action. I'm joined today by Julie Range, our Policy Manager, S.J. Stout, our Senior Communications Manager, and Wei-Chi Liang, our Executive Assistant. S.J. will be kind of handling the chat support and any technical issues you might have. So feel free to direct message her if you have any issues with the tech tonight. And Wei-Chi will be taking notes in case there's any key takeaways from today. Commission Shift Action is the advocacy partner of Commission Shift. We mobilize the public to hold the Railroad Commission of Texas accountable to its mission through legislative involvement and voter education and empowerment. Texas's 89th legislative session concluded on Monday, and the governor still has until June 22nd to sign all the bills that passed. We're going to give you a brief overview of some of the bills that we tracked this session and that we introduced as well. Next slide. So this is our agenda for today. We will talk about how the legislative session started and some of the early momentum that we saw. We'll spend about 10 minutes talking through several different bills that we followed and that we were looking at very closely and testifying on. At the end, we'll conclude with some of the bills that we filed and some next steps that y'all can take if you want to get more involved with Commission Shift or Commission Shift Action, and if you want to support the legislative work that we're doing. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Julie right now to talk to us about how things started.
Well, hello, everyone. I guess one thing I'm not seeing the slides right now, SJ. Am I seeing them?
They are shared, so I can see them.
Okay, good. Well, I don't have to see them as long as other people are. I just wanted to flag that. All right, so thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I think it's helpful to paint a picture of why we had some reasons for optimism, that some good things might come out of this legislative session. In October, the Railroad Commission sent a letter that asks for an additional $100 million to plug wells. And this is highly unusual to have a request come out of the typical budget cycle channels that have timelines and different requirements for how they ask for this money, especially for such a large amount. 100 million is about 20% of their budget from the previous biennium. And so this emergency request, Commissioner Craddock justified early in session, and she pointed to how well plugging has gotten more expensive in recent years. Also that they're running out of the cheaper wells for plugging, and they're stuck with an aging well population that tends to be more expensive to plug. Additionally, there are many multi-million-dollar emergency wells and that keep surfacing. And I looked a little bit more into these, and we're spending about $10 million each year to plug emergency wells. We had about 40 wells in 2023 and 50 emergencies last year. And the average cost to plug these was around $100,000 per well last year and $260,000 per well the year prior. And so, but even beyond the emergencies, costs just generally have been trending upwards, as you probably have felt with your pocketbooks. So we've also had some really spectacularly expensive wells. One cost $9 million to plug. All right. The other thing that was in that budget request, or that special request, was for an underground injection well investigation team. The commission asked for 2.7 million and 10 full-time employees to study why are we seeing all these flows coming out of these wells. The other thing was that Commissioner Craddock asked for direction from the legislature for policy solutions. And this is something that we've been pointing to in our advocacy for years. We need the legislator to change laws, not just make funding available for these problems. And Another thing that gave us hope was that House Energy Resources Committee Chair Drew Darby made this one of his top priorities was addressing inactive well plugging extensions. And then finally, industry filed a bill this session, and that really says, or called SB 1150 that we'll talk about, and it really says something in this current political environment that industry is putting forth bills to impose some additional regulations on themselves because these problems are significant to have all these emergencies happening. All right, so another thing that happened early in session is that Commission Shift, our education and research partner, hosted a Learn at the Ledge event to educate lawmakers and staff about our concerns around all these unplugged wells here in Texas. And also how the policy is creating this problem that allows these wells to remain unplugged. We brought in some guest speakers. Ron Green is an expert water hydrologist, and he spoke to the problems of earthquakes and breakouts of injected fluids that are polluting fresh water and or are coming out at surface. And these problems are happening around the state, and they're connected to produced water disposal and unplugged or poorly plugged wells. We also had Skylar White, an impacted landowner, join us, and he's been a real champion for all of these issues. He's been coming to Austin monthly to speak to the Railroad Commission and joins us regularly to walk the halls and advocate for these changes. He's living this policy failure and dealing with so many of these failing and orphaned wells. And so having him there to share this lived experience is very impactful. And I know we'll repeat this later, but your representative needs to hear from you if you're being negatively impacted. And all representatives need to hear these stories. And then finally, we had Cole Ruiz, who is an attorney that represents groundwater conservation districts, and some impacted landowners share the legal perspective. And we had over 40 staff in attendance, which is awesome because we didn't even provide them food. I will pass this over now to Virginia to talk about the Capitol visit.
Thanks, Julie. Oh, was there a comment? We'll hold Q&A for the end. So Commission Shift hosted a Capitol visit in February. Over 40 people attended from all corners of the state. They had a chance to see how the legislature works and speak with their elected officials about what they're experiencing in their own communities. This delegation was diverse in political perspectives, ethnic backgrounds, languages, gender, and the part of the state that they come from. Spanish to English interpretation and translated written materials were available for the entire event. And I wanted to make a point about that because good governance is one of Commission Shift and Commission Shift Action's core values. And so ensuring that constituents have access to their elected officials in the language that they speak is an essential part of ensuring the health of our communities. And so now I'll pass it back to Julie to start walking through all the bills that we followed.
All right. So before I dig in, a bit of housekeeping on our slides. You'll see a thumbs up, just a thumbs down, sideways. That will help orient you as to whether we supported, opposed, or we're neutral on bills. We will also share where the bill is in the legislative process. Some are signed and some still didn't have hearings. So arguably one of the most important oil and gas bills this session was SB 1150 and its partner or its companion bill HB 2766 that limit well plugging extensions. This bill, currently the law allows operators to get unlimited plug-in extensions. And as long as they comply with this menu of options to qualify for an extension, then they can have as many extensions as they want on that well. And plugging your wells is the most expensive option. But this bill will add additional hurdles for older wells. This bill gives operators of older wells different options for getting plug-in extensions, and these include whether the operator has a history of reactivating wells, if they have a financial hardship, if they're providing a performance bond equal to the cost of plugging that well. And until 2042, they can provide a compliance plan that shows they will plug or reactivate old wells by 2042. there will be a rulemaking around this, and we will provide feedback on that, trying to make these options, try to make it so that these options are not so widely used that they make the rule ineffective. Now, rulemakings are when the agency or where the agency clearly explains how the rules will be enforced and what it expects from operators. It must be completed by December 2026. We came out neutral on this bill ultimately because we think the time frame of 15 years for a well to be inactive should be shorter. And we're also concerned that there are too many loopholes that will keep wells from being plugged. We're also concerned about what will qualify as a hardship. And so how the rule is written will dictate that. And so we encourage landowners and folks impacted by these wells to participate in the rulemaking to ensure that these standards are strong. Now I will pass it back to Virginia.
Thanks, Julie. Okay, so Senate Bill 1146 and House Bill 3911 did pass. We supported these bills. We're not normally for reducing liability for operators, but in this case, this bill will limit liability for people who take over and plug orphaned wells. And so orphaned wells don't have active operators. Those are wells that the Railroad Commission has to pay to plug. And they have had a process at the Railroad Commission that would allow landowners or active operators to take over and plug orphan wells that were not already under their possession. But the program hadn't really been utilized. I think it had been used like once or twice because well pluggers didn't want to take on liability for those wells. And so this law is good because it should help more landowners and operators to feel less of a financial risk when they plug a well that's on the Railroad Commission's orphaned wells list. Next slide. Okay. So House Bill 2663 creates a penalty for lying on an application for plugging extensions. This bill was really important because the Panhandle wildfires devastated 1,500 square miles of rangeland last spring. During the legislative interim, a legislative committee drafted a report about the wildfires, and they found that in many cases, the fires were started or exacerbated by damaged electrical infrastructure that should have already been removed from those inactive wells. According to the report, Craig Cowden, a private landowner, testified that 85% of the multiple fires on his ranch were caused by damaged electrical infrastructure at oil and gas locations. So Texas law already required that operators physically terminate electric service to oil and gas wells when they become inactive or when they're applying for a plugging extension. But House Bill 2663 requires that all electrical equipment be removed from wells that have been inactive for at least 5 years. And it creates this $25,000 penalty for operators that lie about doing so. So this is really important to the enforcement process and to making sure that operators are disincentivized from leaving those electrical lines out on those inactive wells. And I'm going to pass it back to Julie for the next slide.
All right, so SB 2122 and its companion raised the penalties for disposal of oil and gas waste. Waste volumes have been increasing significantly, and this bill imposes application fees for specific types of waste permits, ranging from $500 to $3,000, depending on the activity. These fees they were woefully inadequate to fund the requirements to process them, and they will now go into the Railroad Commission revenue, which helps to cover the costs of the agency processing these permits, and will provide more funding for inspection and enforcement on these facilities. Next slide. HB 3619 requires the Railroad Commission to clean up the surface tract. Currently, they're not required to do that, to leave it in a usable condition. And an example of that is from the first geyser-like blowout that happened in Crane County. You may have seen pictures in the Texas Monthly of this beautiful geyser that's putting basically salt everywhere. And brackish water can come up with all of these wells, and it's full of these chlorides that render the land unusable for decades. And the Railroad Commission stopped the flow, but it left this unremediated area, several football fields wide, that's desolate and basically useless. Sometimes the commission will plug the well and leave old tanks and trash, and this bill will ensure that they clean up their messes. It also requires landowners to be allowed to access their property. There are stories of operators fencing off roads and keeping landowners from accessing their land, and this enshrines that right so that they can move around. Next slide. All right, so HB 4572 was about waste pit public notification and landowner consent. We really hope that we could help gain some traction for this bill. There was a lot of testimony that came in support of this, but unfortunately it didn't pass. It would have strengthened siting and construction standards for waste pits, required companies to obtain permission from landowners on where waste was buried and if it was buried, and would have required companies to give more information about what exactly is in that waste for landowners and the county and the commission. There was a rulemaking last year, and these were all deficiencies that we felt needed to be addressed, and this bill addressed them. And I understand that there was a lot of votes in support of this, but we came up short. So hopefully next time around we can make some progress there. Next slide. All right, HB 49. It's a bill that I considered a sneak attack because it was filed on a Friday and it was scheduled less than a week later for a hearing, and it was identical to another bill. And so I didn't quite catch that it was happening until I was realizing that it was coming up for a hearing right then. But I consider it a gift to a nascent industry that's working to treat produced water for reuse. We don't yet understand the risks that are posed by treated produced water on human health or the environment. Produced water itself has a lot of bad things in it, besides all the chlorine and things that are bad for the land that you basically make it so you can't use it. There's also benzenes and other bad things potentially that are in fracking fluids that we don't even know about. And basically, we don't understand the risks that are posed to human health or the environment, and what regulations are necessary to protect human health and the environment for treating that produced waters to make it good and usable. This bill will limit liability for companies that produce and treat and sell and transport this produced water, and it also protects landowners who lease their land to oil and gas producers or for the application of treated water. It protects them from cases of personal injury, death, property damage, and there are some exceptions. Companies can be sued for gross negligence or for failing to meet regulatory standards. But even if there are damages, the claimant cannot obtain exemplary damages, and these are the damages that are like really meant to deter bad actors, and they're the compensation for like the pain and suffering and the heartache that the claimant must have had to put up with to have got a judgment in their favor. And it also sets high burdens of proof for claimants. Finally, it also requires TCEQ to set standards for use. And as long as the company is meeting those standards, even if they aren't sufficient, those standards aren't sufficient to protect human health or the environment, you can't go after these companies for these liabilities. Now, we aren't opposed to the concept of treating and reducing or reusing produced water, but what we disagree with is giving these broad protections from liability and extending indemnification of liability, basically getting this liability for all beneficial uses of produced water. And according to my reading of this bill, it also includes consequence. This includes for exposure to not just to the treated produced water, but any component or byproduct of produced water prior to its treatment. We think this is a necessary giveaway that if we don't understand these long-term known impacts of treated, or that when we don't understand these long-term impacts of treated produced water. And if all this concerns you, please pay attention and participate in the TCQ rulemaking that will set these standards for reuse. And you can even reach out to the bill author, Representative Darby. Thank you, letting him know that you think this went too far. Passing this back to Virginia now.
Thanks, Julie.
Next.
So this is a bill about carbon capture and storage liability, much like the produced water liability bill. This bill was filed last session and it came back around this session. Thankfully, it has died in both sessions. We heard lots of testimony from people who oppose this bill the last two sessions. And this session, despite hearing all negative testimony on the bill did pass the House Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee with a vote of 7-4. But it was never voted on the House floor, so it did not pass. But it is disappointing to see that even when a bill gets negative testimony from constituents and active stakeholders, the committee can still vote it through. This bill would have significantly limited liability for operators all along the carbon capture and storage supply chain. It would have made it nearly impossible to file suit against a company for any nuisance that their facilities cause or what are called non-economic damages. Those can include loss of consortium, disfigurement, and physical impairment, among other damages. We oppose this bill because carbon capture and storage is a nascent industry in Texas, just like produced water treatment. There are pipelines in consideration that could cross from Houston to Midland and Corpus Christi to Laredo. And limiting liability at the beginning of an industry that's starting out is a good way to normalize companies cutting corners, and we don't want to see that. There was a pipeline incident that was caused by a Plano, Texas-based operator in 2019 that caused dozens of people to go to the hospital, and some people still experience chronic short-term memory loss from that incident. We don't want those kinds of carbon dioxide incidents to happen in Texas, and if they do, people should have a right to bring claims against the companies. Next slide. All right, so this is the last big bill we want to talk about. That's Senate Bill 1, the House Appropriations Bill, and House Bill 500, the Supplemental Appropriations Bill. So the agency received a total of $461 million for the biennium. The agency collects revenue from oil and gas operators every year into two pots. One is the General Revenue Fund, and the other is the Oil and Gas Regulation and Cleanup Fund. Then they get appropriations from the legislature from both of those two pots each year. This year, there was also a budget surplus in the state that was related to sales tax revenue and severance tax revenue. Severance taxes are paid by oil and gas operators on oil and gas production. So some of the money Railroad Commission was appropriated this year likely came from the budget surplus. Senate Bill 1, the appropriations bill, is appropriating about $117 million per year for oil and gas well plugging and remediation. These numbers are not on the slide, so pay attention. And that comes out to around $234 million for the biennium. Out of that, around $47 million per year will come from federal taxpayer dollars. In October, I think Julie mentioned this earlier, the Railroad Commission asked for an additional $100 million to plug orphaned wells because their cost of responding to emergencies has caused plugging costs to skyrocket, and they weren't able to plug as many wells as usual. Those $100 million were approved in HB 500, the supplemental appropriations bill. The total amount of money going towards well plugging for the biennium will be $334 million, or an average of $167 million per year. Prior to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the average amount of money spent on well plugging in Texas was about $55 million per year. So We've about tripled the amount of money that we're spending on well plugging, including both state and federal funds. Let's see. The last thing that we want to talk about, we're also glad to report that the agency is getting those 5 employees to investigate problems with underground injection wells. That is, wells that are used to dispose of produced water or for other injection activities. And so these wells have been causing earthquakes, geyser-like well blowouts like the one in Crane County that Julie talked about, and sinkholes throughout the state. And so we're glad that the agency is getting money to better investigate what's going on. And let's see, next slide. Now I'll just talk about some of the bills that we filed. Next slide. So Commission Shift Action is taking a proactive approach each legislative session. We made sure that bills reflecting our priorities were filed and that we weren't just following the bills that other people were filing or just the bills that the industry associations were filing. These bills that we filed did not get hearings, and we are going to need much more engagement from constituents to be able to get hearings in the future. And so the first set of bills that I wanted to talk about were the inactive well requirements, bills that would strengthen those. So there was a bill filed by Representative Goodwin that would require a sinking trust fund, and that would replace the current forms of financial assurance that operators have to provide for wells, which many times are blanket bonds. So operators can put up a bond of $250,000 to cover 100 wells or more. And so it comes out to less than $2,500 per well in many cases, even though it costs tens of thousands of dollars to plug wells. So we've suggested a sinking trust fund to remedy that. HB 4612 would require companies to notify landowners and groundwater conservation districts when the company is going to go out and do a mechanical integrity test on a well. And the reason for that bill, why we filed that bill, was because landowners were asking for it because they were finding that operators were falsifying their mechanical integrity tests, which are required by the Railroad Commission. Finally, House Bill 5003 on waste pit requirements would require operators to notify people who live within 1 kilometer of a proposed waste facility that they're applying for a permit application, and it would allow many more people to participate in any public hearings for those waste pit permit applications. So this would be a good way to ensure that people affected by these facilities or people knowledgeable about what could go wrong with these facilities are allowed to participate. Next slide. Okay, and so there was a name change bill filed again this session by Representative Anchia and Senator Johnson. We have recommended that the Railroad Commission's name be changed to the Texas Oil, Gas, and Minerals Commission. I know it doesn't roll off the tongue and it doesn't have a cute acronym, but Railroad Commission and RRC aren't cute acronyms either. So, so we think that this would be more appropriate so that voters know who they're voting for when they go to the polls to vote for the commissioners, and so that people know who to go to when something goes wrong with one of these facilities. HB 2751 filed by Representative Goodwin would require more expansive recusal requirements if commissioners have any kind of an income or have any kind of business with a company that is worth more than $5,000. And finally, House Bill 4835 would create a funding mechanism for training emergency first responders that need to respond to incidents caused by carbon dioxide pipelines or capture facilities or injection wells. We simply don't have the infrastructure for that right now in Texas. None of these bills passed, but it's important that we all come together and make sure that we can get these kinds of changes in the future. Next slide. I'll go ahead and pass to Julie for this one.
All right, so what's next? Well, there are rulemakings around these bills. SB 1150 is one that we will spend a lot of time trying to make as strong as possible through rulemaking. And so we encourage you all to follow us and get involved. We expect to send out calls to action around the rulemaking But if you want to get more involved, we're also planning to put together a working group on that. And so I encourage you to reach out to me on that if you would like to participate. Another thing that I also will mention that there is the rulemaking of HB 49 at the TCEQ. We're focused on the Railroad Commission, so we're debating how much to be involved in that, but it's still something I encourage everyone to follow, and we will see what we do to provide support on that, but to be determined. The other thing that we're doing is a working group with Commission Shift on P13 wells, and P13 wells are oil and gas wells that were converted into water wells, and there is some legal limbo that's going on right now where they're trying to figure out exactly who is responsible for plugging orphans of these wells. And so I have a working group going on that if you would like to participate and you are not already involved, please reach out as well. But overall, we encourage you to stay active and engage as in both through our commission shift action, and then also pay attention to our advocacy partners. I'm going to pass this on to Virginia to continue on.
Thanks, Julie. So if everyone can pull out their phones now, we have new social media channels for Commission Shift Action. And again, this is where you can follow any of our legislative work. We don't have any electoral work planned in the near future, but there's always a possibility that might happen in the future. So if you want to be more involved with things like that, you can follow us on Commission Shift Action. So if you just pull out whichever social media app you like to use the most, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X, and follow us, our handle is at CSActionTX. That would be really great. And next slide. Okay, let's see. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending this legislative debrief today. I'll open it up for Q&A in a second, but I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who signed on for our action alerts and called or visited your elected officials to ask for changes that hold the Railroad Commission accountable this legislative session. We've heard time and time again that the most impactful thing that you can do in a legislative session is for a constituent to talk to their elected officials. So please keep doing that. And if you haven't done it, please start doing it. If you would like to see Commission Shift Action continue to do this work, bring together constituents, and advocate for policies that keep our water and air clean and our communities healthy, please consider making a donation. We rely on individuals like you for support, and if you want to take your donation a step further, you can make it a monthly donation, and that'll help ensure that we have cash flow year-round to spend time on legislative work. And with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers, and I'll just ask SJ to turn off the recording.